Hello, everybody. I want to comment on another Majority Report clip, which are, as I have said many times, actually, I've only said this once, but okay, they are my favorite reformists, my favorite revisionists. Well, they're not revisionists because they don't, because I don't know that they're Marxists. But yeah, they're definitely reformists. They're like sock dem type people, you know, holding their ground, being part of a broader lib-left media ecosystem, which is part social fascist diversion, but also part, genuine, well-intentioned reformist zeal. And there's actual brains going into the policy side of reformism, because of course liberalism does shroud many things in ideology, but it does need people to actually do the calculations to make the bourgeois state run and the economy work out in somewhat of a stable fashion. And that thus there actually have to be material calculations made. And some people just get really interested in that. Oh, what if the tax rate is this? What if the tax rate is that? They overlook a bigger point, I think, with not being revolutionary, but being reformists. But anyways, this is just a small discussion on that topic. So we're watching a clip, and I'll just play.
We saw the polling. Like right now, Gallup.
And again, at the end of the day, there has to be a change in policy.
Chuck Schumer was talking to the New York Times about as a humanitarian foundation run by mercy.
Yeah.
In many ways,
It's
almost all aid to try to starve. Previously, with Hamas, where they propped up the government of Hamas. Netanyahu openly talked about allowing Qatar to fund Hamas so that they could use them as a scapegoat to further immiserate Palestinians, because Hamas was not a leftist or, pacifist organization.
Okay, pause. So, I think Sam's going to provide the correct analysis, or, a part of a correct analysis. But I just wanted to go into it. What Emma said, it's not that they supported Hamas because they were not leftist or not pacifist. They would gladly support a pacifist organization because pacifists don't fight back. They just wanted to sow discord and to make Palestinian society unstable from the inside by introducing some sort of political antagonism. Anyways, pacifism isn't the correct angle here, but of course, they did support Hamas, which is like a nationalist, national liberation movement kind of organization with sort of religious elements here or there. And they didn't support like some sort of internationalist communist faction of whatever, But anyways, here comes Sam's analysis.
The way that, some other Palestinians groups had been. So
they wanted to basically divide the Palestinian people and yes. Have a competitor to Fatah.
Right.
So that there was no no unified Palestinian body politic, essentially.
But just to give, they're not. Well, Israel isn't just blocking almost all aid to try to starve Palestinians to death in this final solution territory. They are also funding groups that will steal aid so that they can justify it on the ground. And this level of depravity and evil is historic in many ways.
It starts.
So that's important to mention, that it's actually worse than, naive just thinking dehumanization is when you don't care about people and you just treat them as mere material obstacles. But they're not only doing that, it's adding an element of complete derangement. It's adding a cruel element, because fascism is like a ticking time bomb, a self-destructing ideology that just devolves more and more into this sort of misanthropic hatred of what it means to be human. You hate the other, and then you begin to doubt yourself because you recognize in the other also a human, and then you begin to hate yourself for, doubting that the other is really different than yourself, and then you begin to hate yourself because it's like a vicious cycle of repressing it more and more and becoming more and more deranged, I think. Anyways, let's keep going.
With the whole smearing of the UN, the GHF should not exist. There should be no use for a, quote, Gaza humanitarian foundation run by mercenaries. I talked with Jasper Nathaniel about this. Like, humanitarian aid is actually a discipline. You can't just have some mercenary come in and do it. UNRWA should be...
Another classic failure of capitalist logic, by the way, is that, it's just, it's giving stuff to people, whatever. Everybody can do that. Let's just pay some people to go do it. No, you actually need expertise, because it's actually a deeply human and social matter that you have to deal with, and you have to have a lot of context knowledge. So, yeah.
Doing this. It isn't Israel let aid in, it's Israel let the UN in. But unfortunately, even Chuck Schumer was talking to the New York Times about how anti-Semitic that organization is. Yeah. So here we are.
Chuck Schumer, fuck you, Chuck Schumer. We all hate you.
I should also say, got an email from a listener, Abby, in Minneapolis. She was doing a raffle. We missed the email, but for Many Lands Mutual Aid, who
Maybe
provides as much food aid as he can in Gaza.
Because I didn't
we'll also
look this up.
Include that link,
but,
in it's also a separate GoFundMe. I don't know. I'm not familiar with this. Listener Abby writes in and then says that she's been raising money for them. But
I think now comes the thing that I wanted to discuss.
The Gaza bakery stuff, or at least we've spoken to Muhammad on this program a couple times, I think, over the past year or two. But we'll put both links in there. And again, at the end of the day, there has to be a change in policy.
There we go.
There's, and it's obviously extremely difficult to be outside of the coalition that is dictating policy in this country and influence it.
So let's go back. Let's hear this whole statement again.
It's obviously extreme. At the end of the day, there has to be a change in policy.
At the end of the day, there has to be a change in policy. Definitely agree. 100%. If policy is any political decision that is converted into action, then yes, definitely. But if change in policy means that you want to get a resolution through Congress that there will be no more aid to Israel, then A, you will have a really hard time with that, and B, it won't matter because the whole system is like gridlocked to oblivion, and basically whoever is shameless enough to wield the capitalist state as effectively as like is possible with being just a scammer, which is always going to be the Republicans, is able to override stuff. So I bet Donald Trump could give Israel, just money from the state somehow, right? Even if Congress didn't allow it, whatever. Doesn't matter. And I think Joe Biden would also have found a way if Congress was against it. Doesn't really matter that much. But now let's listen to what Sam says next.
There's, and it's obviously extremely difficult to be outside of the coalition that is dictating policy in this country and influence it.
And it's very hard to be outside the coalition that is dictating policy in this country and influence it. Right. You were never in the coalition, right? You were in the voter coalition, quote unquote, or you've been in the quote unquote voter coalition for the Democratic Party. But that doesn't mean that your interests are represented by the representatives, in communists' terms, those would be something like delegates. You don't actually have control over them. They don't report back to you. They don't really have to serve your interests. You can't unelect them, right? You can't withdraw them from their position. And you also have this impotent, like, tiny epsilon of power over the Democratic Party as like an abstract entity, right? You can inject stuff into the media cycle, but what does that actually do? Well, the answer is very little in comparison to who's actually wielding power in the Democratic Party, and those are the 1%. Those are the capitalist class. Those are billionaires, large capitalists, financiers. These people already have power in the Democratic Party. How? Well, because in capitalism they have power, right? And the whole, democracy, Republican, liberal democracy, or whatever that the term is, or even parliamentary systems, they're sort of just plays that are acted out. And we call a country like very democratic if what happens in the play actually influences actions that impact the larger material sphere, so economic actions or welfare state or whatever. And we call the system undemocratic if it's all just very obviously for show, and everything is decided moment by moment, like Vladimir Putin or Vucic in Serbia. The elections are then also fake, and for Putin they're definitely obviously fake, and for Vucic it's like, yeah, we know there's some stuff going on, right? Anyways, what I wanted to say is that the Democratic Party is, by just how it's set up, how it has been set up since 1825 or whatever, since whenever they've been in power, it's a 1% owned, genocidal, imperialist party. Okay, there is really no way to change that. Because, and I'll explain it to you, if there was a way to change it, right, then we would still need local political legitimacy, that is, they actually would have to somehow respond to what ordinary people, what the masses are expressing as their needs. So what it would have to be, because normally if we're building a new party, we say, okay, we want a rank and file organization. That is, we need a cadre, and then we need the rank and file, and there's steps for recruiting those. So we're saying, okay, the Democrats, we have to use that party for some reason. And how are we going to go about this? Well, what we need to do definitely is get a rank and file going. But the Democratic Party doesn't work like that. There is no rank and file. You can register as a voter, but what does that give you? Nothing. It gives you like a fake identity thing that you can then use to feel important when you watch the news. But do you actually have any power? No, you can just impotently scream into the void and hope that your appeal to, a future where the whole party talks like Bernie Sanders and whatever, it's A, not going to happen. But even if B, it would happen, it would only happen because the current crisis of capitalism was already so far progressed and so heightened that they basically need to imminently prepare for total fascistic shutdown of democracy to prevent revolution, right? What they would then do is go all social democrat, thereby blocking revolutionary communists from getting the masses, or at least that's the play they've used in the past. That's the play the bourgeois state apparatus has used in the past, is to create the social fascists. Those are the SOCDEMs. And that they will tell you, no, a revolution, it's far too dangerous. We can do this. We can just do a few of our reforms. We've thought so long about this, whatever. And the revolutionary communists say, no, you need a revolution because you need to change the mode of production. That is the most important part. And you need to suppress bourgeois rule in society. That is the second most important part. The ideology, of liberalism will not dissipate. You cannot outcompete liberalism under capitalism. That is just ahistorical. And if it comes to the point where liberalism becomes completely absurd to people because their living conditions have become so bad that they can't indulge in the fantasies of one day becoming a billionaire or whatever, if they're just too captured by their immediate material needs, well, guess what? They're not gonna just by themselves go, oh, right, I'm a SOCDEM now. No, they're gonna just be fucking frustrated and angry, and they're gonna listen to anyone, okay, who validates their anger. Who's that gonna be? It's gonna be a fascist, right? So liberalism produces this like demonic latent version of itself, which is fascism, and that just comes out to save the day. And the question to reformists is, do you want to play a revolutionary role or a counter-revolutionary role? I am not attacking your position here. I'm not saying you can't be reformists anymore. I'm saying let's leave that aside for a moment. Do you want to play a counter-revolutionary or a revolutionary role? And that's the important question, because if you want to play a revolutionary role, then you're going to have to ask yourself, how do we avoid the trap of social fascism? How do we avoid the trap of the masses becoming distracted into impotent parliamentary or voting participation when they should actually be building local political structures, local collective organizations? They should be building workers' unions and tenants' unions and whatever parties and cadres, right? We have to build that power because we're going to need that to create or derive from our material conditions then possibilities to create a new society. And there's also the next question for you, reformists. Do you want to create a new society or do you not want to create a new society? If you don't, then, my friend, you're a liberal. You want capitalism to continue, right? So, anyways, let's listen to a bit more of this.
I think to the extent that there's Republicans who have argued against the policy that this government has in supporting what Israel is doing, I don't know that they're ever going to have the numbers.
We saw the polling. Like right now, Gallup has 25% of independents support Israel's military action in Gaza. 8% of Democrats support it. Around 70% of Republicans.
Right. So Emma's talking about voters. Again, it's kind of sneaky when liberals do this, but I don't think they do it maliciously. I think they're just kind of naive. Voters are not the party. If voters were the party, they wouldn't let us do this stuff. They wouldn't let us do this parliamentary and this voting crap if voters were automatically united into a political manifestation of certain material interests, of a class interest. But you aren't part of the party. You need to understand what a political party is and how it functions, right? And how its hierarchy, the enforcement mechanisms, make impossible some routes that seem, why shouldn't it be possible? Why shouldn't it be? Well, yeah, but that's utopian thinking. You shouldn't be asking, we deserve this. No, it's not about deserve. It's about what is possible. So, Sam talked about the fact that they probably don't have the numbers. Well, the Democrats don't have the numbers either. The Democrats, as far as I know, the House and the Senate, are still dominated by Zionists, even though the voters, who also sort of count as the Democratic Party somehow, are totally disagreeing with them. Okay? So how again does this differ between Democrats and Republicans?
This was our argument prior to the election. It was that it's not about the candidates in the sense as it's about who's in the coalition. And you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene or Thomas Massey speaking out. It's not making a difference. And it's about who's in the coalition. And kind of Democrats support it. Around 70% of Republicans do. This was our argument prior to the election. It was that it's not about the
By the way, this argument turned out to be false, and Emma's whole theory of the election turned out to be false.
Candidates in the sense as it's about who's in the coalition.
Right. So, turns out that argument was already used before to elect Joe Biden, and there were people talking about we can pull him left. And they did some very meager things that could be classed as reformist and thus somehow as left, right? That's not nothing, They even tried, at least formally, to do student debt relief. Well, anyways, what I want to say is this argument was trotted out many times, and it's basically the lesser evil. It's just rephrased. It's like, right, lesser evil goes, which is more evil, And this argument goes, where is it easier to exist fighting against the thing, right? It's like a weird, sneaky rephrasing of the question, which is more evil. And it turns out lesser evilism is nothing. It's like a fake. It's like a piece of paper. You go to a restaurant, you order like a schnitzel, and they show up with a piece of paper, printout of a schnitzel. It's nothing. You could eat it, but it doesn't give you anything, nutritionally speaking. Well, I don't know what about that analogy. So she's going to say the thing about who represents the anti-Israel people in the Republican Party. And we're also going to look at that.
And like you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene or Thomas Massey speaking out. It's not making a difference.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, eye roll. Which I agree, those people are horrible and also very stupid and also goons of capital. And also evil, to a certain extent, although that sort of comes from being a goon of capital, being stupid, and being like just an opportunist, which is a goon of capital. Anyways, right. She says they don't make a difference.
And it's about who's in the coalition. And like you've got Marjorie Taylor Greene or Thomas Massey speaking out. It's not making a difference. And no matter how many media figures are doing this, because Trump wants to turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East, and he...
Right. The argument structure is the following. Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene represent the current anti-Israel faction of the Republican, House and Senate. Okay? These two say stupid stuff or wrong, bad stuff, whatever, all the time. And they're media personalities. And now, she says, well, they're not really, you can't do policy through them, which I agree. They're just media personalities. And then she says, but that doesn't have sway because Trump wants Gaza to be the Riviera of the Middle East. What did Biden want it to be? What does Netanyahu want it to be? What did any president of the U.S. in the prior decades want it to be? What does capital want it to be? What does U.S. imperialism want it to be? Right? I mean, those questions are sort of they're asked in a rhetorical way. Of course, these things don't exist as entities, and they can't really want stuff. But you have to point out how the power actually materially influences parts of the system. And if you claim that Republican politicians are, politically almost inconsequent media personalities, and you claim that, okay, there's so few of them, how are they ever going to get the numbers? Well, isn't that the same in the Democratic House and Senate? Right? Like, the Democratic House and Senate also has a few people who are essentially media personalities because they can't really do anything. They can just say, like, ooh, Bernie Sanders can say, I hate Netanyahu and he is the bad man and it's a war and a bad war and I hate Netanyahu. He can go out there and say that. And people are like, yeah, look, he's trying. Look, he wrote this bill or whatever. Anyways, what makes him so different from Marjorie Taylor Greene in the terms of being a media personality, right? So what's going to happen is there going to be like a wave of Zoran Mamdanis and AOCs to like make this Sokdem party? Like, how are you going to do that? Even within your strategy. And my question is, why would you want to do that? Because social democracy is trash. It like always sells out the masses. It always betrays the revolution, or at least it has so far. Like, I wish to actually live in peace, within the proletarian movement, with other strands of this movement. But that's something that a social democrat, a reformist, has to answer for, is the betrayal of social democracy of the revolution. Like in the German Revolution. If you can't explain that, then I don't know. So, yeah. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in either party, by your own argument.
Did a quid pro quo basically with the Israel lobby, including Miriam Adelson, to annex the West Bank in exchange for helping him get elected. So this is what we've had. We are not in the coalition.
Yeah, Joe Biden is much better because Joe Biden just does it for the heck of it, right? Joe Biden participated in a genocide just for the heck of it. Trump is a bad guy because he wanted something for himself out of it. Are you serious? Of course, Joe Biden also wants something for himself out of it. He gets to feel important. It's really no different if they do the same thing. Are you kidding me? I know Trump is more daring in this and more nakedly transactional and more whatever, more nonchalant about how he just says things sometimes. About how he makes his intentions very, very clear sometimes, which the Democrats usually don't do. In fact, they lie all the time about working tirelessly around the clock to get a ceasefire done. And yeah, what's the difference?
In the same way. This was part of what Slotkin was saying in that interview with Crystal. I don't see the same amount of protests against Trump. First of all, it was because Democratic voters had the gall to expect that their president would have a little bit more humanity than Donald Trump. And we were in the coalition, so we had the opportunity to influence them. Secondly,
you didn't have the opportunity to influence them because it's not, they don't actually respond to. I don't get how liberals cannot see this. Okay, so we're going to say that we're going to accept, for the purpose of argument, this thought that you have, as a voter, the potentiality to influence the coalition, right? So, but you also know the system can be cheated, right? Gerrymandering or whatever, or all these bullshit voter intimidation, voter rolls purging, whatever. You can do these things. And also, you can just fund massively bigoted, lying, sensationalist, anti-intellectual crap that just gets people to vote in some morons who are going to lower the tax rate for fucking capitalists to make them even richer, even faster, right? You know that. Okay, and then your answer is, yeah, and then so these morons get them to raise the taxes, so maybe we can to lower the taxes, so maybe we can get them to raise the tax for the rich. No, you don't get them to do anything. You are like a interactive spectator in a video game. The path, you're only given options that already align with the class interests of the ruling class. Okay, so sure, they're gonna do things like FDR did, right? They also recently called FDR a class traitor. Wait, maybe I can find this in here. I think it should be here somewhere.
Flanking an old guy.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
all of them, almost all, have to show their legs.
Exactly.
Yes, it's
Middle of this.
Districting applied. Apparently, you only has no
That Democrats have said we're so much better than the Republicans in so many of these states that they've relied on. That's why California is centrally focused here, is because we could. This is like the threat, gerrymandering. It actually.
same with New York.
Yes.
Same with New York. But it's just a stunning amount of ignorance, and nobody seems to catch her on this.
because she's supposed to be a person.
That's why Democrats, if you're worried,
I think it was a shot at Pritzker.
Okay.
Nobody seems to catch
Maybe it was
Tinker.
earlier.
It has no percentage of my, if Texas does this, I am looking for him ultimately to cut taxes for Jeff Bezos, for Elon Musk, for
Yeah,
Bill
he's talking
Ackman,
about
and
Pritzker.
for me, because he's that wealthy too.
You mean cut taxes, you raise
Yes.
taxes.
That would
No,
be.
he said he was
Oh,
criticizing
for
Trump
me.
to cut those taxes. Like, he's got to start acknowledging
That
because he's not going to be
would
able to
be a
hide it when he
good
when he
starting
runs for
point.
president.
Right. Well, but that's the angle he could do it if he's smart about it. And if he does run in that way, it would be telling if he avoids that. And that means that this is another status quo guy. But if he wants to do I'll be the FDR.
Wait. This is another status quo guy. You can already see by the fact that he's influential in bourgeois politics, right? Do you understand sort of where I'm coming from? Is he an anti-capitalist? If not, he's kind of a status quo guy, right? Oh, so he just doesn't want this late stage of capitalism. Okay, he wants to go back to some earlier stage, but the system is still fucked. System is still broke. You know? You have to fix it. So he's already a status quo guy by being a presidential candidate in the US election. At least within the Democratic Party. You know?
Guy that will no longer
Class
be a
traitor.
billionaire and be the class trader, and I'll take on the bullies. I do think that's a salient political argument for real.
It's not a salient political argument because FDR was not a class traitor. FDR actually was a class hero. He was a class savior. He he stabilized the U.S. and, brought capitalism back from the brink of revolutionary potentialities, right? The labor movement after that, he initiated basically an age of reaction, an age of undoing every of these, like, oh, this is what we're going to build upon. This is what we're going to make even better in the future. We're like sock dems. Each of these little things that was built, Social Security and whatever, and the high tax rate and this and that, all of these things were good, but they weren't meant to be the end, right? Because if you can just lower the number back down, then you can get just as bad. So they wanted to build on these things, and they never did build on them things. They tore them down. And that's the same way it was in Europe. And why did they have to do those things? Well, the Soviet Union existed, and there were huge labor movements and whatever. So I wanted to talk about that FDR wasn't actually a class traitor, but a class savior. And I think the other thing I also articulated quite well.
The idea that, for example, basic conflict.
Sorry.
The idea that
Sam Cedar.
Okay, I have no idea. Anyways, that's the end of the video. Bye.